Broadcasting live from the Valley of the Sun, Phoenix, Arizona, in the heart of the great American Southwest, it's Erskine Overnight. Now, here's Erskine.
Dr. James H. Fetzer. He's the author of Murder in Dealy Plaza. I think that's the best book I've read on the Kennedy assassination. American Assassination, The Strange Death of Senator Paul Wellstone, another fine book. 9/11, Science of an Inside Job. Gather that, inside job. Render Unto Darwin and 9/11 Conspiracy. The scientific evidence concerning 9/11. The events of 9/11, the assassination of President Kennedy, have similarities with 9/11. Both events led to sham commissions being set up and the consolidation of power and control over America, which we're seeing exhibited today. This was the setup for a takedown, which we've had to right now going on across America, even across the world. Tonight, we're going to discuss new information from the Secret Service and ask the question, who's telling the truth? Clint Hill or the Zapruder Film? The Zapruder Film, which we've all seen of the assassination of President Kennedy. Is there one Zapruder Film or are there more? Who doctored it? What happened? Was there a cover-up? Jerry Blaine wrote the book, and it's called The Kennedy Detail 2010. Just came out, and this was, according to the book, to set history straight, to leave a book for his grandchildren that they could read and know the truth beyond any measure of doubt. Basically, Clint Hill comes out in the book, and what he says is that, well, he says a lot. We're going to talk about that right now, that the car was stopped versus the official version that the car wasn't stopped. We're going to go into all of that. Dr. Fetzer, welcome to Erskine Overnight.
Oh, Erskine, I'm just delighted to be back with you. Thank you so much.
This book was dynamite in what it presented for somebody like you. It gave absolute authenticity. Clint Hill's own words, new proof that the Zapruder Film had been faked. The Secret Service, it actually comes that they may have done a setup for the hit, and we're going into that. 2 agents were left behind at Love Field. The 112th Military Intelligence Unit was ordered to stand down. Motorcycle escorts reduced to 4. Open windows were not covered. The crowd was allowed to spill out into the streets. These are all things that are unconscionable, that were all done by the Secret Service. Somebody gave the order that we don't need this high level of protection for the president, and certain agents were to stay back. And in other words, there was something going inside. It's just like 9/11 when they had this situation going on where the entire North American Air Defense Command was looking one direction when they were pulling it off in the other. It's like the magician and the pretty assistant. You're looking over here while the real act's taking up place over there. But this is a lot more serious because it's about the fate of America, isn't it?
You're absolutely right, Erskine. You're absolutely right. Clint Hill doesn't directly concede that the limo came to a stop, which is something we know from many other sources, including 4 or 5 that I cite in the article, but rather what he says he did in the interval of time when he began to rush forward, climbing on the back of the limo, climbing up, pushing Jackie down, getting over her and JFK, looking down and peering into the back of Jack's head, all before the limousine reached the triple underpass, Erskine. We don't see that in the film. Clint Hill has been saying the same thing about his actions and activities for 47 years. And when you compare
Let's go back to one thing before we get to that. It's talking about the limo stopping. Bill Lovelady on the steps of School Book Depository. I recall the following shooting. I ran toward the spot where Kennedy's car had stopped. That was an FBI. He said that the 19th of March, 1964. Roy Truly on the north side of the building. 24th of March. The car I saw, the president's car, swerved to the left and stop. Stop. They keep using the word stop. Mrs. Earl Cable. And she is the, wife of the mayor of Dallas. She was 4 cars back, and she said, I was aware the motorcade came to a dead still. No question about that. Every car in the motorcade had come to a standstill. We were dead still for a matter of some seconds. Now, how can they deny that it stops when you've got people, and you could go on with a bigger list. These are people from all over Dealy Plaza, all of them saying that it stopped. Does the Zapruder Film show the limo stopping?
It does not. One of my favorites, too, Erskine, is Tony Foster, who said during an interview with Deborah Conway in 2000, for some reason the car stopped. It did stop for seconds. I don't even know why it stopped. And all of a sudden it sped up and they went under the underpass. I could never figure out why the car stopped. We have as many as 60 witnesses who talk about the limousine either slowing dramatically or coming to a complete stop. And, of course, Erskine, depending where they were, some would have seen it slowing dramatically as it came to a complete stop. All the evidence holds together here. And Clint Hill's description of his activities is inconsistent with what we see in the film and could only have occurred had the limo come to a stop. When they edited it, there wasn't enough time when they took out the stop for him to do all those things, so they had to leave him standing on the steps at the rear of the limo as they reached the underpass, Erskine. It's really stunning.
The other thing that's very stunning is that he describes a wound, the hole the size of his palm, with part of the brain gone, and one of the agents, the brain matter actually hit him. He thought he had been hit with a shot himself, and it was the president's brain. I know this is gory, it's bad, but it's not as gory and bad as what's happened to this country ever since. This is astonishing, especially versus the autopsy and x-rays, isn't it?
That's absolutely right, because, I mean, there's a very important sentence in the book which states that let me find it right here. And slumped across the seat, President Kennedy lay unmoving, a bloody, gaping, fist-sized hole clearly visible in the back of his head, page 217, the Kennedy detail. That confirms what all the witnesses said, Erskine. We got over 40 witnesses who reported a blowout to the back of his head. It also falsifies HFCA diagrams and photographs of the back of the head, which shows no such blowout. It also shows that the x-rays, which David Mandick had studied and discovered had been patched over, were clearly patched. I mean, here's confirmation coming from the first witness other than Jackie to actually see the hole. And of course, in addition, it falsifies the frames of the film that don't show it. I discovered in a late frame, 374, you could actually see the blowout, Erskine. So I created an article out of this, which anyone can find online by entering Who's Telling the Truth, Clint Hill or the Zapruder Film, and they will see for the first time a frame that actually shows the blowout to the back of his head.
You've got frames 313 through 316, the blowout of the head, and it's painted black. What does that tell you?
I know, Erskine. A new group of Hollywood experts has confirmed that the blowout in the film and those frames has been painted over, crudely painted over in black. Roderick Ryan, who was an expert in special effects, who was a consultant to Noel Twyman when he published his book Bloody Treason, had explained to Noel back in 1997 that the bulging blood and brains to the right front had been painted in. So we have multiple forms of deception. They painted in the bulging blood, they painted out the blowout to the back of the head, and they took out the limo stop, and in the process, they didn't have time for Clint Hill to do all the things he actually did. It's quite stunning.
Now, the x-ray witnesses, was there not a doctor with whom you spoke who was there who actually said, hey, this is what happened, it was the size of a baseball? Tell a little bit about that, Dr. Fetzer.
Absolutely. When I organized a research group back in 1992 consisting of the best qualified individuals to ever study.
Wait a second. Let's talk about that when we get back because we need to take a short break. This is too important. Doctors who actually were there and what they said versus what the public was told, the autopsy and the x-rays. More when we get back with Dr. James H. Fetzer, who I consider the #1 expert on the Kennedy Assassination Commission. There's autopsy reports and there are x-rays. However, if you talk to the doctors, as Dr. Fetzer did, and if you read the book that Clint Hill told and the story he told about a size of your fist hole in the back of the president's head, one of the Secret Service agents actually thought he had been shot when he got hit with the gray matter coming out of his brain. At that point, you're knowing that there was indeed a cover-up and that there was falsified information. Tell a little bit about the doctor who you talked about who actually was there.
Yes, Charles Crenshaw was a resident at Parkland Hospital when Jack's moribund body was brought into trauma room #1. and he was the last physician to observe the body. He actually closed Jack's eyelids before he was wrapped in sheets and placed in the bronze ceremonial casket. Aubrey Wright, the ambulance driver, appeared on a television program with me and Beverly Oliver, who had witnessed the blowout to the back of the head, in which Aubrey described feeling this massive gaping wound at the back of his head when he lifted the body to put it into the casket. Chuck Crenshaw, 2 days later, would be responsible for the treatment of JFK's alleged assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, in trauma room number 2. But when I published Assassination Science, I invited him to contribute a chapter, which he did, and diagrams of the wounds. And he told me on several occasions that the size of the wound was that of a baseball or your fist when you double it up. So what Charles Crenshaw told us corresponds with what we read in the Kennedy detail and from Clint Hill, that there was this massive blowout to the back of the head. And yet, if you look at autopsy diagrams and photographs that the HSCA, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, depended upon when it reinvestigated the case in 1977-78, Erskine, there's no such blowout in the back of the head, no such blowout. In fact, David Mantic, who has both a PhD in physics and an MD and is board certified in radiation oncology, which is a treatment of X-ray of cancer using X-ray therapy, has gone into the National Archives now 8 or 9 times, and there's a brief video report of what he found in relation to those HSC photos when he subjected them to stereo viewing, which you can find on YouTube under the heading JFK Autopsy Photo Forgery. It only runs around 5 minutes, and you'll learn directly from Dr. Mantic that when he subjected it to stereo viewing, he discovered that while the head as a whole is in 3 dimensions, the back of the head is only in 2 dimensions. In other words, they took original photograph and then faked it by imposing a 2-dimensional photograph of a skull of a scalp that was not Jack Kennedy's. You can find that online on YouTube, JFK Autopsy Photo Forgery.
Now, one of the things that this brings up is that the shot could not have come from A, the school book depository, B, they came from at least 2, probably 3 different directions, and C, that the lone bullet theory, the lone shooter theory, the magic bullet theory of Arlen Specter was absolutely a lie.
Everything you're saying is correct, Erskine. I gave a presentation at Cambridge about the magic bullet theory, which I subsequently published in an international peer-reviewed journal. The bullet that hit Jack in the back entered 5.5 inches down below his collar, just to the right of the spinal column. It was a shallow shot, only went in about as far as the second knuckle on your little finger. So it wasn't even remotely in the appropriate location to have transited his neck and exited his throat, as the government claims. Anyone can find that article online under the heading Reasoning About Assassinations. David Mantic also took a patient with similar neck and chest dimensions to JFK and plotted the official trajectory, which Gerald Ford had redescribed from his uppermost back as an entry location, which is already an exaggeration, to the base of the back of the neck. And what Mantic did was, by tracking the official trajectory, he discovered it was impossible because cervical vertebrae intervened. In other words, no bullet could have taken the path that was ascribed to it by Arlen Specter and the magic bullet theory.
The other thing that you bring up, and I find this to be absolutely totally fascinating, is there the real Zapruder film, is this the one being shown to the Secret Service, whereas the fake one is being shown to the public? Tell a little bit about that, Dr. Fetzer, because I found that to be even more telling in some regards.
Well, we heard rumors that the CIA might have been using the authentic film to show how assassinations are carried out. But when I read in the book, The Kennedy Detail, that Clint Hill was being asked to comment on it when it was being shown to Secret Service agents during their training, it struck me that the extant film, what's publicly available, is so different than what he's been saying for 47 years that they must be using the original film. Otherwise, it would be so obvious to Clint that the film they were showing was fake. So that's a conjecture on my part, Erskine, but it's one for which the circumstances suggest that it's true.
I don't think it's a huge leap, because if they were showing the one where it doesn't show Clint Hill jumping on the back and pushing Jackie Kennedy down, then he would have stood up and said, excuse me, this isn't right. They've left out this important part. This is what I actually did. Clint Hill's not the sort of guy to sit back and let it just fly, is he?
You're absolutely right. No, Clint seems to be a pretty upright guy, and one of the fascinating parts of all this is that they're doing book signings where he and Jerry Blaine talk about the book and their experiences, and one of them runs around 45 minutes, and I included it in the article about who's telling the truth, Clint Hill or the Zapruder Film. So you can actually click on that link and you'll hear Clint Hill about 25 minutes into the presentation at the book signing describing exactly what he did. And you can see for yourself, because I also provide links to the Zapruder Film in the superb version that John Costello, who has a PhD in electromagnetism, the properties of light, and the physics of moving objects, which means he's an expert on optics and has been a most important contributor to exposing the fakery with the film, has provided. So you see this superior version of the Zapruder Film, better than anything you've ever seen before. And you can compare it with what Clint Hill has to say, and you can hear him saying it, and it's not rocket science, Erskine, to realize that what Clint Hill is describing is not what you see in the film.
The key to this, Dr. Fetzer, to me is not only have you got this proven, you've got it nailed down, you've got another witness who's coming forward, because you did all the science in back of this, and this is confirmation to the science that you put out years and years ago. And it's absolute confirmation coming from somebody who was actually there. You don't get any closer than the person who was on the back of the car. That's as close as you're going to get to the assassination of the president. You don't get any better information than the doctor who actually treated the president after he was shot. The key to this, and what's most important, is this is not essentially, this is tampering with evidence, absolute tampering with evidence, and it also is who did the cover-up. Have you got any clues as to who orchestrated this and did the cover-up? Because the people who covered it up for a reason. The reason was they didn't want the American public to know who was behind the assassination of the president. They wanted people to still believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Who did the cover-up of it? And did Oswald actually have any part at all in the assassination? More when we get back on Erskine Overnight. 2 questions for Dr. Fetzer. Number 1, shots came from at least 3 different angles. You know that, so there had to be at least 3 different shooters. Was Oswald involved in any of the shooting of the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy? Number 2, the cover-up on this. Who was responsible for the cover-up? It had to be some very, very, very high-placed people, and it seems like we're getting some of these people are starting to talk right before they die, which is a good thing. We're at least starting to learn a little bit about it right now. Number 1, did Oswald have anything at all to do with this, or was he, as he said, I'm a patsy?
Well, it's very interesting, Erskine, and an excellent question. Two shots were widely reported on radio and television that afternoon, a shot to the throat and the shot that hit him in the right temple and blew out the back of his head with such force that, as you've observed, in particular, the motorcycle patrolman to the left rear thought he himself had been shot when he was impacted with this material. Those shots were both fired from in front, so that when Chet Huntley and David Brinkley were reporting the news, and later they reported these wounds and attributed the shot through the head to Admiral Berkeley, the president's personal physician. When it later came in that the shots were all supposed to have been fired from above and behind, Frank McGee said, this is incongruous. How can the man have been shot from in front, from behind? Which is, of course, the problem with which the Warren Commission had to deal. The weapon that Oswald was alleged to have used, Erskine, this Mannlicher Carcano World War II piece of junk, actually only has a muzzle velocity of 2,000 feet per second, which means it's not high velocity. The government concluded, and the death certificates report, that JFK was killed by the impact of high-velocity bullets, which means that the weapon that Oswald was alleged to have used cannot have fired the bullets that killed the president. Second of all, he was reported in and around the lunchroom at 10 minutes to 12, at 12, at 12:15, as late as 12:25, by Carolyn Arnold, who was the executive secretary to the vice president of the book depository. After the assassination, which occurred at 12:30, within 90 seconds, he was confronted by a motorcycle patrolman who held him in his sights until Roy Truly, whom you mentioned before as supervisor, came over and assured the man that he belonged here. They both, in their written statement, said he wasn't agitated, wasn't perspiring, wasn't out of breath. Truly said he was a little startled, as anyone might be, to see an officer holding a revolver on them. And the motorcycle patrolman added he was drinking a Coke. So we have ample evidence that Oswald actually wasn't even on the 6th floor, that his weapon can't have fired the bullets that killed the president. Marino would later observe he admired JFK and bore him no malice. So the guy who got fingered for this was indeed a patsy who had neither the means, the motive, or the opportunity to kill him.
Now, who did the cover-up? Was it done? Supposedly, I would think that it's looking more and more like the basic cover-up was orchestrated by the CIA. Who did the cover-up?
Well, it's a very interesting, important question, Erskine, because the efforts that are published in the 3 books I edited, Assassination Science, Murder in Dealey Plaza, and The Great Zapruder Film Hoax, bringing in experts on all the different aspects of the case, indicate that the secrets, there are more than 15 indications of Secret Service complicity in setting him up for the hit. The CIA, military, mafia, anti-Castro Cubans appear to have been involved in taking him out, and actually there appear to have been shooters at 6 different locations. Third of all, the FBI was used to cover it up, where J. Edgar and Lyndon Johnson were principals with financing from Texas oil men. Now, the film was originally developed in Dallas and later taken to the National Photographic Interpretation Center of Washington, D.C. for study on Saturday. But on Sunday, a second film was brought from Rochester to the National Photographic Interpretation Center, where there's a secret lab called Hawkeye Works run by the CIA. The films were physically different. The one that was brought in on Saturday was an 8mm. It had already been cut. The one brought in Sunday was a 16mm uncut, where the kind of film that Zapruder was allegedly using is double-sided. You expose one side, and then you take it out, flip it over, and expose the other side. So the result is a 16mm that has to be split to create an 8mm film after it's developed. The National Photographic Interpretation Center even had to go out and buy an 8mm camera Saturday because they had to get somebody to open their company, their business, in order to get a camera because they didn't have the ability to project it. 2 different teams were used to work on these, but where Douglas Horn, who was the senior analyst for military affairs for the Assassination Records Review Board, which was responsible for declassifying documents and records held by the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service, and so forth, under a mandate Congress granted after Oliver Stone's film JFK recreated so much interest in this case, has reported exactly how it was done, and I have given a summary of his studies in an article entitled U.S. Government Official JFK Cover-Up Film Fabrication. Now, the key point you're driving at, Erskine, is this. Just as the limousine was taken back to Ford and completely dismantled and rebuilt already on Monday, the 25th, the day of the formal state funeral, the recreation of the Zapruder film can only have been done with authority at the highest levels of the American government, equal to J. Edgar Hoover as director of the FBI or Lyndon Johnson as president of the United States. So what who
gave the order to dismantle and to completely go over the limousine? Who did that?
I'm very confident that that came from the president of the United States. In fact, there's a new book, Erskine, devoted to Lyndon Johnson's role in all of this by Phil Nelson. It's entitled LBJ, the Mastermind of JFK's Assassination. I highly recommend it. It's a complement to the other brilliant book by James Douglas, Douglass, JFK and the Unspeakable, where Douglas's book explains how Jack had antagonized the most powerful forces in the country, including the Joint Chiefs, the Mafia, the CIA, and the East Coast bankers, and Phil Nelson's during his term in office, and therefore wanted him removed. And Phil Nelson's book explains what they did about it and how Lyndon was the pivotal player. The key to it, Erskine, was making sure that no one who was involved in the assassination would ever pay any penalty. The only one who could assure that would be the case would be the new president of the United States. Even Jack Ruby observed in some of his very remarkable comments, since he appears to have been one of the only persons involved who had a conscience, that if someone else had been the vice president, this event would never have taken place.
The big meeting where this was all taking place, where they set up for the assassination, was the meeting at Clint Murchison's?
What you have there basically was a ratification. You had representatives of the major groups that were interested in this. J. Edgar Hoover was there. Richard Nixon was there.
Yep.
Also George Brown at Brown and Root Heavy Construction. When the Vietnam War went down, Brown and Root got $1 billion to dredge a new port at Cam Ranh Bay, even though Vietnam has many magnificent natural ports, and I'm sure it was completely unnecessary. John J.
What about George Bush? Was he? Know that there's a picture showing him at the Texas School Book Depository. Was George Bush there?
Bush does not appear to have been there that evening, but Bush certainly was in the vicinity, and as you observe, he was present in Dallas after the assassination. And there's a book now out entitled Family of Secrets by Russ Baker that explains what the Bush family was doing throughout all these years.
More when we get back on Erskine Overnight with Dr. James Fetzer. The ambulance that took John F. Kennedy, the Navy ambulance Pontiac that took him to the hospital, Parkland Hospital in Dallas, is for sale at the Barrett-Jackson auto auction. Some say it's real, some say it isn't. Barrett-Jackson is saying, yeah, it's the ambulance that took Kennedy there. Did they destroy that ambulance, or could it be the actual ambulance?
Well, it's very interesting, Erskine. After the body was put in this bronze ceremonial casket, it was taken to Air Force One and loaded aboard the plane. When Lyndon was sworn in, everyone was called forward, apart from JFK's former military aide who remained with the casket. It appears as though at that point in time, the body was taken out of the casket and put in a body bag and stored in a compartment of the plane. And then when it landed at Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, it was transferred to a helicopter in the background and flown to Walter Reed so that the bullet fragments could be removed. When it was subsequently delivered to the back of the morgue at Bethesda Naval Hospital by men in suits in a black ambulance, and it was brought in a pinkish gray shipping casket and inside this body bag, so that when Gerald Custer, who was the radiation technologist who was actually taking the x-rays of the body, was headed upstairs in the company of Secret Service agents to have some of them developed, he looked out the window and was astonished to see the official entourage with a gray Navy ambulance and Jackie Kennedy arriving at Bethesda Naval Hospital, because here the body was already in the morgue and the autopsy was already in progress. So they played a shell game with the ambulance and the bodies to conceal the fact that the body wasn't actually in the bronze ceremonial casket. This is wonderfully described in Doug Horn's books about this entitled Inside the ARRB, where it really provides a vindication of David Lifton's brilliant early work on the assassination entitled Best Evidence, where Lifton was convinced that the body had been subjected to alteration before the official autopsy began, which entailed stealing the body from the official coffin and getting it elsewhere so this could happen. Not only has Lifton been proven to be right about the body being removed from the casket and so forth, but we have two witnesses, including Thomas Evan Robinson, who was the mortician who had prepared the body for the funeral, who actually observed Commander Humes perform a partial craniotomy on the body to expand the size of the wound to the back of the head from that fist-sized wound to something that looked more like a footprint. In other words, if you take that fist-sized wound as the heel, then imagine a whole foot being impressed on top of the head. Then you get something like what Humes created astoundingly. He allowed Robinson and another witness to sit there and watch while it happened, all before the autopsy took place, Erskine, so that when Robinson was deposed by the Assassination Record Review Board and shown a sketch that Humes' assistant, Boswell, had drawn and asked him about this dotted line, Robinson explained, no, that wasn't on the body. The doctors did that, meaning that they'd expanded the size of the wound to make it look more like it had occurred from a shot from behind than the shot from in front.
Wow. So it just it seems like with that many people involved, you've got that many Secret Service and everything, that it's hard to keep a secret, Dr. Fetzer.
Well, actually, a lot of people have talked about this, Erskine, even in Bloody Treason, which was published in 1997. Noel Twyman on one page, 285, lists 8 major figures who talked about the assassination before or after, including Santo Trafficante, Carlos Marcello, Sam Giancana, David Atlee Phillips, multiple others, even Lyndon, who told his mistress, Madeline Duncan Brown, during a rendezvous at the Driscoll Hotel on New Year's Eve 6 weeks after the assassination, when she confronted him with rumors rampant in Dallas at the time that he'd been involved, since no one stood to gain more personally. He blew up at her and told her the CIA and the oil boys had decided that Jack had to be taken out. And many others have also talked since then, including, for example, Chauncey Marvin Holt, who was a contract agent for the CIA. I got to know personally, who prepared the 15 sets of Ford's Secret Service credentials for use in and around Dealey Plaza. Charles Harrelson. Chauncey was the third of the 3 tramps. Charles Harrelson was the tallest. He is the father of Woody, the actor, who
right.
said he shot JFK. Later, when he was on film, he took it back and said, well, while he said that, he was out of his mind, and the very fact that he said it showed he was out of his mind. These people are very, very clever, Erskine. Another was Jim Hicks, who claimed to have been the communication coordinator for the operation, and there's a photograph of him where you can see an antenna hanging out the back of his pocket. And to pick up on an allusion you made earlier, E. Howard Hunt, who was a very important guy for the CIA, wrote lots and lots of books. He was a planner, a very interesting fellow, confessed to his son, St. John, before he died, that he'd been a backbencher at the assassination, but he enumerated the names of those who were involved, from Lyndon Johnson to David Atlee Phillips, who was CIA for the Western Hemisphere, to Court Meyer, with whose former wife JFK had an affair, to William Harvey and David Sanchez Morales. It's really fascinating stuff. There is, by the way, a simply excellent 1-hour program on the assassination that Jesse Ventura presented on his conspiracy theory show on True TV. I think it's the best single hour that has ever been presented on the assassination. And he draws in evidence implicating the succession of presidents who would never have held that office but for the death of JFK, including Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and later, of course, George Herbert Walker Bush.
And, of course, you'd have to go with George Bush because that's another one that's the same thing. Change the course of American history to where we are today. More when we get back on Erskine. President Kennedy had ordered the first troops to return home from Vietnam. President Kennedy was going to do away with the Federal Reserve System and had issued new money being issued by the Treasury Department under the Red Seal. President Kennedy had a task force going after the mob. President Kennedy certainly upset of the powers that be. They had to take Kennedy out. They had to take Martin Luther King out. They had to take out Malcolm X. There were a number of people that had to come out in the 1960s in order for the New World Order, the elites, whatever you want to call it, to take over and to do what they have done to this country right now and to make the money that they've made. It was very, very successful. This inextricably is linked to 9/11. We wouldn't have had a 9/11, in my opinion, if we hadn't had a Kennedy assassination. The country would have been totally different. It's the same type operation. They'll use this same sort of thing anytime that they want to. The CIA apparently is basically a major assassination squad. Any comments on that, Dr. Fetzer?
Right, Erskine. In fact, and of course, Bobby had to be taken out because he was promising to reopen an investigation into his brother's death, which would have exposed all of the chicanery going on. I addressed that in an article entitled RFK Outing the CIA at the Ambassador, for those who want to follow it up. I think your remarks about 9/11 are very well taken. If it hadn't been possible to assassinate a president in broad daylight, steal the body in violation of state law, fabricate all the evidence, recreate the film, and have the American people be sold this bill of goods, I don't think that those who conspired on 9/11, which included, once again, some of the highest authorities of the American government, including Dick Cheney, Vice President, Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, Richard Pearl, Donald Fife, Paul Wolfowitz, General Richard Myers, Rudy Giuliani, and Larry Silverstein, would ever have been emboldened to undertake this kind of corrupt act involving the murder of 3,000 American citizens in order to promote a political agenda. It's a shocking legacy, Erskine, and our major media are massively complicit here because the information is out there. What we know about JFK is available. They should be publishing it on every page, and of course we learn more and more about what happened on 9/11, which they're also utterly failing to reveal to the American people.
Well, look who owns the major media. Now, the other thing is I want you to give out any information, any websites, anything about radio or anything else that you care to right now, Dr. Fetzer.
Well, thank you, Erskine. Yes, I have a radio program 3 times a week. It's called The Real Deal. The archive for the show is radiofetzer.blogspot.com. Some of my best articles and studies about 9/11 and JFK are found on my blog at jamesfetzer.blogspot.com. 2 other sources I mentioned are assassinationscience.com and 9/11scholars.org.
All those are listed on ErskineOnRadio.com. Go up to my website. Dave's done a terrific job, and he's listed all of those websites. You don't have to write them down. Just go up to ErskineOnRadio.com. Go up there, and you'll see the work that Dr. Fetzer's done. See for yourself and listen to his program, radiofetzer.blogspot.com. It's all up there on my website, so just go there. Dr. Fetzer, once again, my friend, you're fantastic. Thank you for being on. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you on Erskine Overnight.
I can't thank you enough, Erskine. I feel the same way about you.
Take care. Take care, friend.
Ladies and gentlemen, Erskine has left the building.